Hi, everyone. Welcome to Seeds of Change, our first industry-wide virtual session on production sustainability. We really appreciate you making the time to join us today. And today also happens to be Stop Food Waste Day, so it's all coming together. I am here in Toronto, the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. I'll add today, I am a mid-aged white woman with medium-length blondish hair, and I'm sitting in an office. The world around us is changing at a rapid pace, and it's so important that we keep up with the times by adopting more sustainable practices in the content we produce and support. If you think about it, a huge amount of waste and pollution lies behind the scenes of every production. According to BAFTA, a single hour of television produced results in an average of 13 metric tons of carbon dioxide. These emissions amount to nearly as much as the average person generates in an entire year. The good news is, as content creators and stakeholders in this industry, we have the ability to change that statistic and be part of positive change and movement forward. Our hope for this session is that it will seed some ideas for you, whether you know nothing about production sustainability or quite a lot. At CBC, we released our 5-year environmental strategy, Greening Our Story, in June of 2021. Since then, we've been pushing to incorporate environmental thinking into everything we do. That includes how we produce or support content creation, including making the Albert Carbon Calculator mandatory, and what stories audiences see. CBC documentaries have been informing audiences about our changing planet for decades. No CBC documentary stream has done more than The Nature of Things, which has been on CBC for over 60 years. Here to remind us what is at stake are the fantastic new hosts of The Nature of Things, Sarika Kala-Suzuki and Anthony Morgan.
Hello, everybody. I'm Sarika Kala-Suzuki. It is wonderful to be with you here today and an honor to be representing The Nature of Things alongside my co-host, Anthony Morgan. For low vision people joining today, I am a biracial woman with black curly hair, and I am wearing a black shirt. And I'm speaking to you from the Songhees and Esquimalt territories on Vancouver Island. I am thrilled to be part of this event because the theme is one that is very dear to me. Growing up in the Suzuki household, it's something that I've had to grapple with my entire life. And I think that all of us are pretty aware that we are living in a critical time when it comes to the environment. The science is clear. We have this small window of time to make transformative change, to reduce our emissions and try to get back in balance with the natural world. So we have what it takes to tackle this challenge. We have the solutions. So I suppose the question then becomes, will we seize this moment? Now, earlier this year, I had a bit of a formative experience when I wrote and hosted a show for The Nature of Things called True Survivors. And this show was all about how we will survive climate change. And I remember being very nervous to embark on this journey because the last thing I wanted to do was make a film about climate change that would be depressing. But what happened was I became inspired through the people that I met on the film. I met scientists, Indigenous leaders, community members, people working within the film industry who have committed to sustainability and are quite literally transforming Canada. I also heard from many viewers, particularly young people, who said they felt energized by the themes in the show because this is what is on their minds right now. This is what's important to them. This shift is not only urgent, it is necessary. And instead of looking at it as some kind of a hindrance, we should be looking at it as an opportunity for fundamental positive change. And again, young people see this clearly, and they are the ones who inspire me every day. So I just wanted to finish by recognizing all of you here. As people in the film and media industry, you are some of the most creative and influential people out there. So if you rise to this challenge, it is guaranteed to bring about powerful things. Thank you for listening to me. I am excited to hear from others today, and I look forward to rolling up my sleeves with all of you. Anthony, over to you.
Thank you so much, Sarika. Likewise, I feel tremendous gratitude and excitement to be here with you all today. My name is Anthony Morgan. For those who with low visual abilities, I like to think I'm a young Black man. I'm wearing a red hat at a very cool angle, and I'm sitting in an office. For those of you who don't know me, I have been fortunate enough to be blowing stuff up on television and talking about science on TV for the last 10 years or so. But I'm also a scientist. I do research out of the Toronto Metropolitan University, and I study, well, I'd like to bring up an image now if I could. This is what I study. I study the emotions and behavior of people playing games, just different kinds of games. So what's just come up on the screen is the face of somebody experiencing something called an epic win. So lots of surprise on the face, lots of excitement, a little bit of anxiety, but definitely a lot of focus and excitement. Somebody experiencing an epic win. An epic win is when we experience an outcome so unbelievably positive that we did not think it could be possible. It was literally outside the bounds of what we could imagine, particularly because of the odds we're up against when we achieve it. It stretches the boundaries of what we believe we can do. And what is required for an epic win? Well, two things mostly. Number one is a really valued goal. And the second is a big obstacle to that goal. And so this is what I study. I study games, and in my case, I study the ways that games can change the kinds of conversations we have around climate change in particular. So we want a really big obstacle to a valued goal. I'd say a valued goal might be something like living harmoniously on this planet. And there are certainly no shortage of big obstacles to that goal. I think Sally and Sarika have already pointed to some of those. And the problem with having a big obstacle to a valued goal is that we can feel threatened. We can feel really discouraged when we don't feel that we have the resources necessary to overcome that obstacle. We fall into what's called a threat mindset. Our creativity plummets, our empathy evaporates, and our courage is hard to find. So how do we overcome the sense of threat? Well, we do it in two ways, primarily. The first is to increase the amount of perceived resources we have access to. So that means the kinds of things we're going to be talking about today, figuring out what things exactly we can do to help us overcome the challenges that climate change represents. And the second thing we can do is to understand how to properly use stress. We think that when we face stressors that it universally has to be a bad thing, and it really doesn't have to be. When we get ready to play a good basketball game, you might say, I'm amped up to play basketball, but people wouldn't say that before taking a math test, and you could. So the goal is to use your stress by changing the way you think about it, reappraising. And that means something as simple as me telling you that you can use the stress you're experiencing, that physiological arousal, to challenge it into greater creativity, greater innovation, and greater capacity to achieve epic wins. And so I hope that framing is what we can take to the rest of this conference. And so I'm so excited to hear from the rest of you. I'll throw it back to Sally.
Thanks so much to both of you. CBC is really part of a content ecosystem. And as both Sarika and Anthony were really flagging, none of this change would be possible without you. Our partners in the industry are independent producers, other cultural and content financing organizations, and so many more. We wanted to create this event to really recognize, share, and celebrate all of the groundbreaking production sustainability work that's happening here in Canada. To that end, we have a great lineup of speakers today. During the sessions, you can ask a question on the question function on Zoom or the notes function on YouTube. We will feed those questions to the speakers. And if the speakers don't have time to answer all the questions, we will send you their answers as part of the follow-up. So now I'm going to turn things over to Chris Shim. He's our CBC lead analyst on custom research, and he will tell us about some new CBC research, which will help us understand what Canadian audiences really want when it comes to climate change. Over to you, Chris.
Thank you, Sally. Good afternoon, and thank you for taking the time to join us today. My name is Chris Shim, and I'm a lead analyst on the custom research team here at the CBC. I'm a male with short black hair, wearing frameless glasses, and today I'm wearing a red button-down shirt with white dots, sitting in my home office with a blurred background. And I'm here today to present some findings for some research that our team did on how people in Canada feel about climate change and whether they would be receptive to more climate change themes in their programming. Now, this was done through an online survey that was fielded in early January of this year among 2,000 English-speaking adults living in Canada. You can always get in touch with us if you'd like to hear more about the methodology behind this study. But hopefully there are some tidbits in here that will set the stage for today's discussions and provide some momentum going forward for your own projects. Now, the first question you might be asking is whether those living in Canada actually care about climate change. So one of the first things that we did was in this survey, we asked respondents to select their top issues from a list. I've only shown the top 4 answers here, and we have healthcare coming in at 57%, followed by the economy at 52%, then housing at 38%, and climate change 4th at 30%. Now, climate change has been higher in the past. It's ranked more highly, and it actually came in 2nd in last year's version of this study. However, it's understandable that people have been dealing with immediate concerns, such as having enough money to make ends meet or keeping a roof over their heads. So the climate has slipped a little in the ranking. Now, 30% may not seem like that much, but keep in mind that this means that out of all the issues that respondents could have selected, nearly a third decided to say that climate change was one of their top concerns, ahead of taxes, jobs, crime, or even education. And even if climate change does not rank among the top concerns, that doesn't mean that people don't care about it. We also directly asked whether respondents were concerned about climate change, and 39% said they were very concerned, and another 42% said that they were somewhat concerned. This means that in total, 8 in 10, or 81% of respondents, say they're concerned about climate change to some degree. And knowing that so many Canadians are concerned about the climate, are they stressed out to the point where they think all hope is lost and there's nothing that they can do about it? Well, the next slide shows that our research shows that all hope is not lost. 40% of respondents disagree with the statement, "It is already too late to act on climate change." Now, I should note here that does not necessarily mean that 40% agree, as those who are on the fence, that were sort of neutral, were also excluded from that 60% calculation. So the actual proportion of people who actively agree is smaller than 40%. But moving on, a similar proportion, 59%, also disagree with the statement. But it's something comes in. As those who create, influence, and produce stories that are enjoyed the world over, you have an opportunity to nudge the conversation. So on the next slide, I'd just like to pause to slip in this slide, which presents the results from a separate study that we did that asked respondents how interested they were in climate change appearing in different types of programming. I'm only showing the top 5 answer choices here, but 43% said that they are interested in climate change being presented in documentaries. I think the enduring popularity of series such as The Nature of Things, along with Blue Planet and Planet Earth, they really highlight how people have been paying attention to the environment and how it's changing. In second place, 35% say they're interested in climate change in TV shows, just below news at 33%. And so this is significant because when we talk about climate change in the media, we often jump to documentaries and news broadcasts. And once again, this highlights the power that those producing TV shows have in influencing people's awareness and the discourse around climate change. So hopefully that provides a little bit of background for the next slide, which shows how important respondents think it is that the TV programs they watch address elements of climate change. When asking them, we specifically mentioned examples such as characters, talking about global warming or making eco-friendly choices. And over 1/3, so 36%, say that addressing climate change in entertainment programs is very important, with another 40 saying that it's somewhat important. Put together, this means that 3/4 or 76% say that broaching the topic of climate change is important to some degree. So all of this to say that climate change themes should not be limited to documentaries or news. Entertainment shows too, they're a reflection of society. So there's a certain openness to the issue that could be explored a little bit further through this lens. So then this is the question that brings us all here together today, right? How do we actually talk about climate change in entertainment programming? Well, what we did was we took those 76% of people who said that it's important that climate change be addressed in programming, and we asked them how they would like to see it done. We gave them a list of options, and we asked them to select the ones that were the most appealing to them. And I think on this slide, there are some important, interesting points to be learned. The top preference at 63% selecting this option is presenting the effects of climate change, plain and simple. This is not a topic that people are necessarily squeamish about or feel the need to tiptoe around. I mean, the truth of the matter is that people can step outside and be confronted with the effects of climate change. So it's not like this is something that people aren't familiar with. In fact, I would even say that this would be making shows more in tune with viewers' reality and lived experience. The second place choice at 59% is showing characters behaving sustainably. This is also something we're thinking about, as it may be something as simple as showing characters using reusable grocery bags or charging an electric car. These are small nudges that may not seem significant, but accumulating together can keep the issue at the top of people's heads. Even we have in third place, climate change themes being shown passively at 45%, meaning that even if there are some who don't want the climate to be front and center, there's still a fair proportion open to see it being referenced somehow. Rounding off the list, we also have climate change discussed in a satirical way at 41%, and characters having explicit discussions about the climate at 34%. But we also know that what people say they want and what they actually want or like can be two different things. So we wanted to put some of these elements to the test. And what we did was we had a small experiment where we showed respondents different clips from CBC programming that introduced climate themes. We then asked how much they enjoyed the clips and how well the clip approached the topic of climate change. So I'd just like to show you the clip that tested the most favorably in terms of being enjoyable to watch. It's from a previous season of This Hour Has 22 Minutes. And as you'll see, it's a way that addresses climate change in a very satirical way while having explicit discussions mentioning the effects of climate change. So it's just going to be on the next slide here.
Mom, Dad, I think it's time that we had the talk. You know, about climate change.
Gross!
I know it's awkward, but it's important, okay? The Earth is going through a lot of scary changes right now, and you need to be informed about them.
Oh my God! I already know about climate change. Mikey from work found a box of Fox News tapes under his older brother's bed, and we watched them at lunch, and they said that climate change is just a liberal hoax.
Well, you can tell Mikey from work that climate change is real, and it's perfectly unnatural. You might have noticed that you're starting to sweat more from rising global temperatures, or maybe you're seeing tornadoes in places where you never saw tornadoes before. Well, that's climate change.
So hopefully that gives you an example as to how climate change can be woven into entertainment programming in an enjoyable way. So finally, I'd like to just throw up some stats and present some additional data that speaks to the responsibility that we have to act on climate change, even when we're behind the scenes. A large majority agree that the CBC has a responsibility to run its operations and media productions in an environmentally sustainable way. And a similar proportion, 83%, agree that the CBC has a responsibility to inform Canadians about climate change. So this is just a reminder that even when we're not talking about the climate in front of the camera, we can incorporate the climate behind the scenes as well. Now, this was a brief look at some very interesting data, but I hope it's given you some things to think about going forward. One, that climate change is an issue that many people living in Canada think is important, want to hear about, want to do something about, and want to see featured in their entertainment programming. 2, while we traditionally look at the issue of climate change from a news or documentary angle, audiences also want to see climate change in entertainment programming. And finally, don't shy away from talking about this issue or having the difficult conversations, because the audience already knows about it and may even be expecting it. Now I'd like to hand it over to Yasmin Abbasikour, Executive in charge of development for unscripted programs on CBC and CBC Gem, as well as Caledonia Brown, co-producer at Cameron Pictures Incorporated. They're going to talk to you about how you can put some of these research findings into practice with the CBC Sustainable Development Checklists.
I was hoping I would also have Yasmin on here for this intro. But hello, I'm Caledonia. I'm a co-producer with Cameron Pictures. I'm a white woman with brown hair with bangs and dark square glasses, and I'm wearing a maroon shirt.
Hi, my video is off at the moment, but when it pops on, you will see that I am also a woman with long dark hair that my mother would say needs a trim. And I am the executive in charge of development for the unscripted department. Our department commissions factual series, and we also collaborate very closely with our documentary colleagues in development. And Chris's slide there, wonder if the admin can just throw my video on because I'm not able to do it. Thank you. Chris, that last slide you had up was a great segue into what Caledonia and I are going to talk about today. We're here to discuss something called the Development Sustainability Checklist. I will quickly run you through the what and why of this document, and Caledonia will share some really great insight into how Cameron Pictures has applied it and been inspired by it. And if there's any questions, we are available at the end to answer them. Hold on one sec. There I am. All right. And also, if you'd like to follow along, there is a link in the agenda to the sustainability documents, and you can follow along with those there. So the Development Sustainability Checklist is first and foremost an educational tool. It really is a seed of change. We wanted to create something that got folks thinking about sustainability early in the development process. So when the time comes to start production, use your carbon calculator, the soil has already been tilled, to stick with the garden analogy, and you're ready to go. When any production is put into funded development, we send what is literally a checklist to the producers and ask them to return it with sustainability considerations that they can commit to checked off. It's a low barrier entry point towards increased sustainability on your productions, and it's hopefully a tool for inspiration as well. We developed this document internally with inputs from execs on all the creative teams, scripted, unscripted, documentary, and we also reached out to producers we're currently working with to glean their feedback. The feedback was really positive from external producers, and that is so encouraging and so inspiring to know we have partners in this. There are two sections on the checklist. There's considerations for storytelling and considerations for production. And we wanted to make it really clear with the storytelling section that we don't want subjects in documentaries or storylines in scripted series to be adversely affected by any of these considerations. On the documentary checklist, we added a note to address this, saying specifically, we encourage you to consider these suggestions in a way that does not interfere with the truthfulness of the subjects. And Caledonia will speak more about working with writers and how her team has navigated these waters on scripted programming. In each section, both the storytelling and the production. Thanks for popping that up there. You can see it now. In each, yeah, you can see that line. That's the documentary one up there. So in each of In each of these two sections, the considerations for storytelling and for production, the considerations are listed from highest to impact to lowest. So some examples on the storytelling list are to have characters or subjects walking or biking, using renewable energy, reusing or repairing items, which could be as simple as carrying reusable water bottles. And then on the production list, travel again is at the top of the list. It has the highest impact on the climate, to start making choices about using, doing less travel even in your productions, or using environmentally friendly ways of travel, train, EVs, all those options. And it's a consideration that's really become more possible in a post-COVID and pro-virtual world. And there's also a section where producers are encouraged to include their own goals and insights that are specific to their production. So our team really has been so excited by the reception to this tool, and we also continue to be impressed by the incredible producers we work with who continue to give us feedback, add their own addendums to the document, and inspire us to continue this work at the CBC. And now one of said producers, Caledonia, can let us know about her experience.
Thank you. Yeah, so Camera Pictures had the opportunity to test the scripted development checklist early on. We found it to be a really useful jumping off tool. It's enormously valuable to start thinking about sustainability early in the process. If you can bake it into the storytelling from the start, you have a much better shot at succeeding than if you try to fold it in later. So Camera Pictures used the project checklist on one project, and the way that we used it was by sending the whole thing to the writer and then following up with a conversation about it. We found that the writer was really open to this and was able to come up with in-character suggestions for on-screen sustainability. For example, he suggested that in one scene, a kid could tell his dad to stop idling his truck because idling is bad for the environment, which would have sounded out of character coming from the dad, but was perfectly in character for the kid. Which highlights the most important thing, the same for scripted as it is for documentary, which is that anything happening on screen or in dialogue be organic to the characters. If it feels forced in, it will be dismissed by the audience because they are generally smarter than that. And I know there might be a concern from some people that the checklists are about censoring creative content or forcing producers to never have gas vehicles on screen again, but that's not what they are. They're a guide, they're a tool. The checklists are an opportunity to start thinking about this topic early on and maybe prompt some changes that feel right for whatever your show is. We found the checklist to be easy to use, and it was a good way to open up a conversation with the writers that we might not have had otherwise. It's not onerous to start thinking about on-screen sustainability in development at the checklist stage, but it is onerous to start thinking about it after a green light, when everyone is just trying to stay ahead of the moving train of production. A quick note on the second half of the checklist, which is the logistics section. The first half is the creative, second is logistics. The project that we used it on that I've been talking about, we had a virtual writer's room with only a couple of days in person. So we didn't have a chance to apply many of the suggestions in the logistics half. But if they do apply to you, it's good to start thinking about those elements early on because it will also make it that much easier when you get to production. So I'm going to see if we have any questions, which does not look like we do yet. So in that case, I will throw to Angelica and Patrick from Cream Productions, who are going to talk about sustainability in front of and behind the camera.
You're on mute.
Sorry about that. Thank you to Yasmin and Caledonia for that introduction, and thank you to the CBC for putting this event on today and for inviting us to speak. We're really excited to be here. So we have a couple of slides that we can pull up, and in the meantime, I'll describe myself. I am a woman with long blonde hair. I'm wearing a blue shirt, and we have a red wall behind us in a boardroom.
Hi, I'm Patrick Cameron, operations manager here at Cream. I'm a middle-aged white guy with messy brown hair and beard, wearing glasses. And I'll point out you can see the outdoors through the TV. behind us.
Nice touch. Thanks, Patrick. So we're here from Cream Productions. We're going to talk about the last 2 years of sustainable production work that Cream has been doing, what's been working. We're going to talk about some of the, let's call them roadblocks that we've overcome, and where we still feel we want to go in the future. And hopefully this can inspire everyone to start their own sustainable efforts on set, both behind the camera and in front of the camera. So we'll go to the next slide. All right, we have a couple of nice visuals in this presentation. We love to let Earth be front and center every time we're talking about this work. So we'll go to the next slide here with our content on it. So first, I'm going to talk about what's in this green box, what Cream's been doing for the last 2 years. We've made a huge effort to reduce our single-use waste on set. That's by providing reusables, switching from plastic water bottles to water dispensers, using compostable packaging in a lot of different ways. We've reduced all of our single-use waste. We've pushed a lot of education to set through signage, through call sheets, memos, and different newsletters and reports. We feel that educating the casting crew is a really important part of getting some of these initiatives off the ground and turning them into habit. We've been diverting a lot of our recyclables and organic waste through a sustainable waste vendor who brings our waste to a proper facility where it's processed and actually used again as new plastic and turned into compost. As I mentioned, we've switched to all compostable food packaging. We've spent a lot of time improving the vegetarian options on set and trying to encourage less meat. We've hired eco-PAs who are helping us run all of these initiatives on set. And we've started meeting with every department during a prep phase before production to talk about these checklists that Yasmin and Caledonia talked about, and talking about the different initiatives that we're doing in each department. We've started greening our plot lines, which Patrick will talk a little bit about coming up. And we're starting to move into talking about producing climate and environmental content, both for our green efforts as well as the content that Cream produces. So as I've mentioned, we've been doing this for over 2 years. We've been really pushing a small and dedicated team day in and day out to increase these efforts. And now we're starting to formalize some of this work into a department. There's been a lot of trial and error. In general, things have been really positively received. There are, of course, some growing pains as we reach breaking points and find solutions to them. And overall, Cream is still really open to adapting. Our team is really open to adapting. And it's been a real all hands on deck effort to get some of these efforts to become habit. We'll go to the next slide. Next again. So turning these initiatives into habit. At first, some of these efforts were not maybe getting the uptake we were expecting. So we've tried as organically as possible to remind people that these initiatives are things we're going to standardize. They're going to become part of our everyday practices. They're not something we just do on the side anymore. And what we've noticed is when things get really busy, our extra efforts for green changes sometimes fall to the side. So what we've done is we've really tried to establish clear roles and responsibilities. So who's responsible for ordering the inventory that we need, who's responsible for coordinating with the eco-PA. And what we actually did was we developed this critical path that you see here. We thought about showing just a part of it so that it would fit on screen, but what we realized was it's actually quite long, and we were doing all of these things somewhat ad hoc until we realized these are a lot of different efforts to add into our production schedule. And so we've actually really formalized it, and that's been easier to adopt it and make sure that none of the tasks are slipping through the cracks. Next slide. Great. And so what happens when an initiative doesn't take off? And we're going to give an example of maybe some resistance or when we get slow uptake. And one of these is switching to more vegetarian options. So we actually started with a 1 vegetarian day a week. And we actually faced somewhat emotional reactions to this. We had to scale it back because people were expressing upset at the menu change. So rather than see this as a roadblock, it gave us an opportunity to think about what is the emotion behind people's behaviors? How do we encourage positive behavior change? And asking important questions around how we can encourage this. So one of the questions is, do we need to share more information? And what I've put in the box here is an example of the difference in carbon emissions when you switch to a vegetarian menu. And so you can see here for one of our shows last year, it was a 50-day shoot. In total, we had 2,700 meals. And if we had served all beef meals, it would have been 26 tons of carbon emitted. And if we served all veggie meals, it would have been 2 tons of carbon emitted. And so sometimes just pushing this information out can help kind of explain to people why we're doing the things that we're doing. And sometimes we also learn how much do we push or not push. For example, in this case, we decided to take the vegetarian day off the menu, although we still provide vegetarian options every day. We took away the one strict vegetarian day, and we're learning to maneuver through this resistance and while still kind of doing our education and explaining to people what we're doing. And so we aren't out here trying to convince everybody, but if we can convince enough people to move the needle and to reduce these emissions, then we count that as a win, and it's still a positive outcome.
Next slide, please. So I'll take what Angelica is talking about a little bit further to apply the logistics at CREAM, the resources needed, and that's where I sort of come in. And as an executive here, I can leverage the company and its resources to for these efforts. So because our, I'll say our enthusiasm is getting the better of us, we've seen a lot of growth in the resources needed to achieve the goals we've put in front of us. So, I always spin that in a positive way, as this is learning how to do this. And ultimately what we're doing is building a new department, maybe a new department that becomes a permanent fixture in our industry. So we're listening to our line producers, we're listening to our coordinators, production managers, and we're keeping it to be an open discussion to understand what they think they need on the floor, in the office, to achieve these goals we put in front of us. And it comes up with some really cool solutions. As you can see here, we got a few PAs that have been coming through here on mentorship programs. And what that does is it brings these folks in a more higher level job. They have more responsibility than just driving a truck. They have a bit more authority on set because they're empowered to, tell a director where to put their garbage. So that's been a wonderful solution to, combine mentorship efforts with our sustainability efforts. And next slide. So this is the cool, fun stuff. This will touch on what Chris was talking about in Yasmin and Caledonia. Chris did mention, the green placement or the green messaging doesn't just need to be in documentaries. Yet we are producing a documentary, an environmentally themed show where our host is traveling the world, talking to people about their projects that are fighting climate change and other social issues connected to that. But what this really does is it's been wonderful around here, because what it's done is it's created a lot of excitement with the bosses, with the CEO, with the president, with our other departments, because it is an environmental show. We started wanting to create some behind the scenes digital content. So now our digital department vice president is thoroughly involved with Angelica to start telling green stories. We're calling it E-roll. It's so that really gets us brainstorming of how to get this message out there. At the same time, we're traveling the world to tell these stories of sustainability and battling climate change. So we're being very careful to also make sure we're talking about the footprint, the emissions we're creating to tell the stories. And we simply, the best solution there is to measure. We're measuring. and we will offset. We'll likely offset with the different organizations that we're showcasing, other than just one offset carbon reduction operation. So to go to the checklist,
We'll go to the next slide here.
Oh yeah, cool. I'm getting told we got to wrap up. So to sum it all up, despite finding these barriers, despite finding the breaking points of our internal staff, we're keeping the communication open. It's a roundtable, it's open discussion, and we want everyone to make their suggestions. We don't mind moving slow as long as we're moving. It's a win, and we're going to keep doing it show by show, reduce as we can, offset to balance it, and keep the learning going.
Thank you. Do we have time for questions, or is it time to pass to the next person? All right, I think we'll pass to Trish.
We will pass to Trish Williams, CBC Executive Director of Scripted Content, and Anna Jane Joyner, Founder and CEO of Good Energy. And they're going to talk more about centering the climate in your scripted stories, featuring the Good Energy Playbook. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Trish Williams, Executive Director of the Scripted Content Group at CBC. I am a white woman with chin-length brown hair, wearing a stripy sweater that looks like a scarf with a green background.
Hi, I'm Anna Jane Joyner, the founder and CEO of Good Energy, which is a nonprofit story consultancy for the age of climate change. Our aim is to make it as easy and exciting as possible to portray climate and scripted entertainment in ways that are entertaining and artful. And yeah, I'm in my 30s. I'm a white woman. I have dark brown, almost black, curly hair, and my background is kind of our brand identity, which is a beautiful scene with kind of flowers and coral. It sort of evokes being under the water and also a starry sky, a little bit of movie magic. That's me, and I think we have a video to share to kick us off.
So I love that quote that Dorothy Fortenberry has, that if climate is in your story, then really your story is science fiction. And that's certainly going to be true in 10 years. It's just going to feel so divorced from our lives if climate isn't portrayed in stories.
I mean, it should be a part of our everyday conversation, right?
Good Energy strives to inspire courage in the face of the climate crisis. They will also provide tools and support for those brave enough to tell these essential stories.
We are here tonight to ensure that we are reframing the climate crisis in a way that people are at the center of the story, especially Black and brown and indigenous and young people.
Our mission is to inspire, support, and accelerate stories in scripted television and film that reflect the world that we live in now and help imagine a better future. But we're missing the stories that can help us navigate it. The purpose of the playbook is to change that. We wrote the playbook to help explore the endless ways the climate crisis can be portrayed on screen, from casual mentions to using climate as character drive and plot.
USC analyzed over 37,000 scripts from 2016 to 2020 and found that only 1,046, that's 2.8%, of these scripts included any climate change keywords. 2.8% feels staggeringly low.
Acknowledging the climate crisis in our stories will help audiences process their own difficult emotions. We need to talk about it in our stories so that we can talk about it in real life. And the most important thing that you can do for the climate is to write a damn good story.
Because every story we tell right now has to have climate change in it.
Stories shape our societies. They shape our policies. And they have the potential to make the impossible feel tangible. This playbook is a tool It's going to provide you with the inspiration, with the guidance that you need to write powerful climate stories.
Climate change is an unprecedented challenge, and surviving and even thriving will require unprecedented creativity. This is Hollywood's role of a lifetime. It all starts with a great story.
That's super helpful to get us aware of what it is that good energy does. I would love to start just by asking you how you got into this. How did you come to do this work?
Yeah, it's there's a lot of ways that I ended up here, but my background is in climate communication strategy. I actually studied it at university at UNC Chapel Hill, and I just hit 15 years working in this space. So my entire adult life and career has been focused on climate, and in particular climate communications. And I come from a family of storytellers and artists. My dad's actually a prominent religious figure on the kind of far right evangelical world in the United States, which is not the kind of stories that I love, but he has authored over 50 books. And I was just, raised, steeped in religion, which is just a set of stories. So even before I had language for it, I kind of innately knew the power of story. And as I went into my career in the climate movement, it just became very clear to me that that was a big gap. It's, just really compelling communications and stories. So I just started moving more and more in that direction, producing my own short documentaries and one narrative short, and just integrating music and story and art into any campaign that I was working in. And then I was in a Showtime documentary series on climate change, which aired in 2014. We spent a year trying to convince my dad that climate change is real. You'll have to watch the episode to see how that ended up. But that just got me really hooked on cinematic storytelling and really exploring how we tell these stories. And TV and film is one of our most powerful storytellers. It certainly reaches audiences at a scale that most other stories can't. And yeah, so that's how I ended up here. I'm a lover of TV and film as well. I'm a big believer just in the power of story. And so it just felt like a natural progression to really focus on climate and scripted, which, as you can see from the video, there's just far too little even mentions of climate change, let alone stories that grapple with it.
Yeah, that was a really interesting statistic. Our scripted team recently did one of your workshops with your Good Energy team and the Good Energy Playbook. We loved it. What really struck me about it was how incredibly practical it is. They actually made it kind of cool and fun too. And one of the things I wanted to ask you about was sort of the myths or misconceptions about climate storytelling that you really tried to address in the playbook.
Yeah, so we do a lot of qualitative research. So we spoke to over 100 TV and film, mostly screenwriters, a few creative executives and producers, and all of those, conversations and insights went into creating the playbook. Some of the hurdles that we encountered in those initial conversations were, one, the idea that, especially in the United States and the kind of US media, that climate change was still too politicized or controversial, which you can, pretty definitively debunk at this point. Just to give you an example, I think it's 75% of American adults are now worried about climate change. So similar to the statistics that you guys cited earlier, and that's across the political spectrum. And as you get younger and younger, there's almost no divide between whether or not you identify as conservative or moderate or progressive. Pretty across the board, young people are really worried about this for obvious reasons. So we really lean into the fact, 86% of consumers, there was a recent statistic, want to support companies that, take sustainability and social impact very seriously. So we're just seeing the mainstream audiences move more and more towards caring about climate. And we also know from research that we did and that others have done that audiences want to see their values reflected in the characters that they see on on TV. And right now that is not happening with climate change. The other one was just kind of that it was too scientific and technical and policy focused, and they just, you know, weren't really sure how to enter the story in a way that wouldn't be preachy or boring for audiences. And we really, you know, encourage, you know, first of all, to be very story first. You know, obviously, if it's not an entertaining story, then not only does that harm the story, it also harms climate change, because audiences can smell that like 100 miles away. So we really encourage, you know, I've had people straight up ask me, like, what if it just doesn't work? Like, what if I just can't acknowledge climate change in a way that feels authentic to the characters? And I've straight up said, don't do it. You know, like we don't want to do anything that harms the stories themselves. We want to, you know, make them more relevant and richer for modern audiences. But I'm also of the belief that, you know, essentially, we're just asking writers to reflect the world that we live in now and to write about what it feels like to be a human in the age of climate change. And that can be applied to any story that takes place today on this earth, now or in the future. And what we really do is work with writers to kind of uncover, if their characters were real people out in the real world, how would they naturally be encountering climate change in their lives? And once you start to dig into that, it becomes much clearer how it could show up in character or the world of this story. So that's kind of our big starting place.
Well, you covered so much there. I have a few more questions, and you did cover them, but and I know we have to wrap up because I think our 10 minutes is almost up, but I did want to ask you, like, just what is, like, you have a practical tip of what can people do to get started right away? Like, what is one thing that someone could do? If you're a writer in a story room, you want to bring this up, do you have a recommendation?
Yeah, I mean, we really encourage writers to explore it across a spectrum. So everything from just showing, you know, solar panels or solutions or climate impacts in the background of a story, but not necessarily even addressing it in dialogue, to it coming up in passing in a conversation, which we know is really psychologically important. We work with climate psychology experts, but it essentially says to the audience that this character that I'm connected to also cares about this and is thinking about it, which is very validating for the audience's own, you know, experience, and also encourages people to talk about it in real life. And then, of course, we have stories where it's a part of the story, but not the focus of the story. The movie Glass Onion is a good example of that, where, you know, it's woven throughout the body of the story, but it's not the focus. And then we have the Don't Look Ups, the Extrapolations of the World, which is our first scripted television show focused on climate change that just came out on Apple Plus. You know, really the stories where climate is a primary driver. And we need across the board, you know, in stories that have nothing to do about climate, it just being acknowledged, to like new stories that really do grapple with it in a bigger way. So I would say start where, like any story, start where you feel most curious and passionate, because that's, you know, a good way to enter in. And in all likelihood, audiences are also curious and passionate about that.
Well, thank you, Anna Jane, so much for your time today. Before we go, I have an exciting announcement. As my team got so much from the workshop, and it's important that CBC support others in the industry to green their story, CBC will be paying for some good energy workshops for the industry. We will organize those in June in collaboration with the CMPA. Some more details will be sent out in the follow-up email, which you will receive. And in the next few weeks, you'll also be able to find more information on the Green Production tab on CBC's Business and Rights website. So now we will hear from Adriana Chartrand. She is lead of the Indigenous Strategy and Content Analyst at Telefilm, and she will speak about sustainability through an Indigenous lens.
Hello, I think I'm on now. As Trish said, my name's Adriana Chartrand. I am a mixed race Native woman with long brown hair, and I'm sitting in my living room with a blurred background. My dad's a Red River Métis or Mitcha from Saint Laurent, Manitoba, and my mom's white. As Trish mentioned, I'm the lead of Indigenous initiatives and a content analyst at Telefilm Canada. And today I'm just going to briefly talk to you about the critical importance of including an Indigenous lens on all sustainability efforts. So from individual productions to production companies to institutions, policy, countries, the critical importance of making sure Indigenous knowledge is a focus in these efforts. So I'll read you very quickly a quote. This is from the International Institute for Sustainable Development, which is a think tank based out of Winnipeg. Indigenous lands make up around 20% of the Earth's territory, and they contain 80% of the world's remaining biodiversity. Assigned Indigenous peoples are the most effective stewards of the environment. In contrast with models of individual ownership, privatization, and development that have led to climate change, pollution, land degradation, and biodiversity loss, Indigenous peoples have practiced sustainability for centuries. I think that's a great quote and a great reminder of the need to focus Indigenous knowledge in these practices. And now I'm going to give you a brief definition of what Indigenous knowledge is, and this definition comes from the Inuit Circumpolar Council. Indigenous knowledge is a systemic way of thinking applied to phenomena across biological, physical, cultural, and spiritual systems. It includes insights based on evidence and acquired through direct and long-term experiences and extensive and multi-generational observation, lessons, and skills. It's developed itself over millennia, and it is still developing today with new knowledge. So I wanted to frame it this way to really emphasize that Indigenous peoples have the knowledge to sustainably steward our lands, and that we do need to listen to them and center that knowledge and those voices in our efforts. And it's always possible to do this. You know, it doesn't always have to be a massive thing. If you're filming anywhere in Canada, for instance, you're filming on Indigenous land. So starting with that consideration, how are you going to treat that land? How are you going to treat the people whose land it is? Do you know whose land it is? So even just starting with some of these questions and these self-reflections, I think can really help lead us into what's pretty much a perception shift, a sort of worldview shift. So centering a worldview that is not, white or the predominant culture or Western European culture. It is an Indigenous worldview, and it is different. And it does take an effort to sort of rejig your thoughts and your perceptions. But I think those two quotes laying out the stewardship of Indigenous peoples over centuries and what that knowledge really means really help to focus what I'm saying. And then I'll speak very briefly to how Telefilm is trying to center this Indigenous knowledge right now through some of our activities and our efforts. So I'm co-leading a new partnership with my colleague Ken Proul with the Arctic Indigenous Film Fund. I'm not going to go into a bunch of details about it right now, A, because my time is almost up, and B, because we will be making announcements about it later in the year, probably at the Imaginative Film Festival and elsewhere. But we are commissioning a research report, a business intelligence report that is really going to look at filmmakers in Arctic Indigenous communities and the challenges they face relating to climate change, sustainability, and also considering the idea of economic sustainability of human capacity, which is really important for isolated Indigenous communities as well. And we're also supporting a training program called the Witness Program, and I'll be very happy to share more about that with you in the coming months. And that is me. So I'm going to throw it to Elisa Supa and Letitia Kagwa. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today. I'm Letitia, and I'm the Environmental Sustainability Lead at the CBC. I'm a Black woman with my hair styled in locks, and I'm wearing glasses with clear frames. I'm so excited to chat with Elisa here about what our industry needs to more fully embrace sustainability and the tools and resources that are making that happen. Elisa, it's great to see you.
You too, Letitia.
My name is Elisa Supa. I'm Senior Advisor of Corporate Projects and the lead on sustainability at Telefilm. And I'm sitting talking to you from my home office in Toronto. I'm a woman with shoulder length dark brown hair and dark rimmed glasses. And I'm happy to be speaking with you, Letitia, and thanks to CBC for this great conversation.
Yeah, so given the huge number of people in our audience with us today, we know that the interest in sustainable production is strong. Can you tell us about Telefilm's approach to facilitating sustainable production and the research that you've done to really validate those efforts?
Sure. I think there's a slide that we can, a couple of slides we can just throw up now, Adriana. Thank you. Well, I just want to sort of frame the conversation of where Telefilm is at in terms of our commitment to sustainability. We launched the first phase of our plan last year at prime time. And our approach, I mean, you've just heard my brilliant colleague, Adriana. We wanted to be thoughtful and mindful in our approach. And really, we were inspired by the Indigenous perspective. And after listening to Adriana, how can you not be? Sorry, can you just go back to the previous slide? The first, yeah, thank you. So what we wanted to do in terms of our approach, we wanted to ensure that sustainability touches everything we do, how we work, and everywhere we work. So not only as an investor in your production, but also as a promoter, and that includes all the international pavilions and festivals, and also as an employer. And the framework for all of our conversations and the hope to make any kind of impact is working in partnership. And today is a perfect example of how important that partnership is, having that kind of framework. So I want to also acknowledge that we've been inspired by people taking the lead in Canada, the provincial agencies, and of course, CBC, but also from our international partners. And those partners are incredibly important because of Canada's presence at Eurimage. So we can go to the next slide. One of the first things we did, and CBC and CMF and other partners helped us reach the industry, we really wanted to understand what producers, what our stakeholders really felt about this priority, how important was it for them, and what kind of tools did they need to really start addressing it? How can we support them? So I'm just going to address the first two things off the top on the right, knowledge of best practices and the financial incentives. So immediately, we launched a number of case studies, again, with a number of partners that are on this call. We looked at a wide range of productions to find out what the pain points are, to find out what are better practices. And also, some of these case studies are across the different regions in Canada. And I'm happy to announce that one was recently completed and launched with our partners in Quebec, Entourneuvre, and it's a feature film case study, Le Meute from Félix Frappier. But the second point, which we heard many times, was about the need for recognizing the different way of working and the financial support that producers need. And that led us to the next slide, revisiting our budget template. I think people understand that the Telefilm production budget template is an industry standard. And what we did was we looked at what are these sort of sustainability related items that people needed to include in their production. And when we did this, took this opportunity, we also looked at elements that would better create a more equitable and inclusive production set. So this was launched by Business Affairs, as I mentioned, and we really turned to a number of key partners. I think we consulted with at least 18, of course, CBC, CMF, the BSO, ISO. All of your intelligence and expertise helped feed into this more, I call it inclusive budget. And we know that this is a financial tool, and I think you know, Letitia, but it's also helpful as a planning tool. And I understand that CBC has a number of great tools that you're using to support producers as well.
Yeah, we do. we're kind of building a growing trove of sustainability tools and resources that is consistently being added to. We really want to help creators incorporate sustainability and environmentalism into their production and storytelling workflows. So on the next slide, you'll see screenshots of one of the planning tools that we've created, and of course that has already been discussed by Caledonia and Yasmin, which is the development sustainability checklists. I apologize for how text heavy the slide is, but as you guys know, the slides will be available after the presentation for you to take a closer look. The CBC has also been hosting a variety of events. Besides this one, Seeds of Change, we've held sustainability roundtables with various stakeholder groups like independent producers to encourage cross-pollination of ideas and practices across the industry. We've also got an online green production guide that's publicly available and walks through how every aspect of production can be greened. If we go ahead another slide. Thank you. Most notably, as Sally mentioned, we've been requiring the use of the Albert Carbon Calculator for a while now. If you haven't heard of it, it's an awesome tool that was designed specifically for the TV and film industry. And it allows productions to track their carbon emissions and look at how typical activities like traveling, providing power, building sets, influence their carbon emissions and environmental impact. The purpose of filling out the calculator isn't just to measure data, but to use that information to inform strategies on how to lower our carbon footprint and reduce energy consumption and material waste, right down to specific items like textiles and plastics. On the next slide, you'll see how Albert can be used to inform decision-making. So the example here shows how much more carbon dioxide would be emitted if, for example, a cast member was flown back and forth between Toronto and Ottawa instead of taking the train. So you'll see that the calculator really empowers you to make these comparisons in real time and pick the options that are best for the planet without impeding your ability to still make amazing content. It's also important to note that there's no such thing as a bad carbon footprint report. The idea is really just to establish a benchmark that can be improved upon no matter where you're starting from. I know sometimes when I'm supporting people with the carbon calculator, they worry about getting a number that's too high, and that isn't really a thing, and that's not really what matters. What we really want to do is find out where we are now and where the opportunities for improvement lie. And so I know we've kind of shared a lot of resources already as it is. So on the next slide, we've just kind of summarized all of them for you. There's clickable links here that again will be available after the presentation. But before we wrap up, Elisa, I heard that Telefilm is beginning to engage productions more directly on their sustainability planning. So can you tell us what that looks like?
Yes, actually, we started that also this last fiscal. It's right now it's on a voluntary basis, but we're asking productions to submit their sustainability plans. We're seeing some incredible and very inspiring and resourceful work that our clients are submitting. It's really what we're trying to do with the budget update, and the plan is to just have a more mindful and thoughtful approach of how people are going into production and starting, well, as you know, as early as development to really consider a more sustainable approach to doing business.
Amazing, I love that. I think it's just so important for us all to recognize that, of course, there are environmental costs associated with creating content, but there are so many ways to mitigate those costs, and doing so doesn't have to reduce the quality of the stories that we tell. And we've got all these amazing resources available to make that possible. Elisa, thank you so much for your time today. I'll now pass it over to Tracy Friesen at CMPA, who will share some groundbreaking research that just might challenge your assumptions about the costs of going green.
Thank you, Letitia. And it was a great setup to talk about oops, I'm just trying to turn my camera on. There we go. To talk about the budgetary implications, because that's what I will be speaking about. I'm not seeing myself on the camera, just making sure that it's a thumbs up. People are seeing the camera. Okay, I'll keep going. I am a white woman in her 50s with shoulder length blonde-ish hair. And I'm calling from the CMPA green walled offices in Vancouver on the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh territories. I am the managing VP at the BC branch of the CMPA, and I have the great privilege of having the responsibility of sustainability and climate action for the organization. Just want to say I come by this quite honestly. I spent over 10 years with the National Film Board of Canada and had the chance to work on social and environmental documentaries in that space. Then founded Story Money Impact, which is a charitable organization helmed by Sue Bealey that amplifies the reach of documentary film. I also had a couple of years as the Director of Communications at the David Suzuki Foundation. And I have to say that Frontlines work was very humbling and a chance to see the climate emergency really close up. And it's led to a few important pieces and motivations for me. So I believe really strongly in two things. One is the power of media to affect social change, the storytelling aspect, cultural shifts. And the other is the amazing opportunities of this sector, the film and television sector, to be a leader in sustainable production practices. The narrow bit I'm going to go into now is the budgetary implications of sustainable production practices. So if the first slide could please go up. I want to acknowledge first two former colleagues, Marcia Newbury, who's now with Thunderbird, and Marcia Douglas, who you'll be hearing from shortly, for sparking this research at the CMPA. The research was done by Earth Angel, and specifically Melissa Felder, as a subject matter expert and researcher, did a tremendous deep dive into the budgetary framework. This is we're going to talk about the scope of this research, some of the learnings, and then some of the possible actions that can be taken. I just want to let people know it's also a little bit dense. This is a shortened version of a presentation that is available in both English and French on the CMPA's website. And next month, the 100+ page report related to this research will also be released. So if we can go to the next slide. The scope here was looking across 6 key production centers in Canada in 4 main areas. These areas were selected because they had their highest potential for environmental impact. Generators, studios, vehicles, and waste. I want to name that human resources and labor were not included in this research project, but we acknowledge and recognize that there are additional costs associated with sustainability experts on your projects. Next slide. Here is a slide letting you know the depth of research that was done by Melissa and the team at Earth Angel. Rolling up into a headline. Next slide. Okay, no surprise, there is a green premium in some of these areas. There's an intent, of course, to be able to bring in other sorts of infrastructure. There can be a cost associated with that, with different range amount in the different areas. And yet, cliffhanger, next slide, there are savings. So one thing that we've been looking at really carefully is how does the premium look to be potentially offset with savings when we look at operationalizing some of these decisions. Next slide. You'll be able to go deep when you have a chance to look, if you're wired this way, more closely at the report itself when it comes out, or the larger presentation. But this slide gives an indication across the different areas of where the premium adds a cost, the operational aspects provide a savings, and the greenhouse gas emission savings are notable. Next slide. in the long run, there is a sense, particularly as infrastructure across all levels of our society catch up with demand in multiple sectors, that we're going to see availability and access more readily available to producers. And this will have an impact on the types of expenses that might be being felt and borne now that could go down in time. Next slide. In the end, this was done on a sort of a template budget of a $10 million feature as a baseline in order to do the research. And with these elements attended to, the greenhouse gas savings in this one example was 120 tons. Now, the average featured film has a big range in terms of the tonnage. I know that the impact or the case study that was recently released by Rolling Green, Entre Nevers, its overall greenhouse gas emission was in this area of just over 100. However, some reports that we have seen in other jurisdictions, it can be 400 tons, 1,000 tons, or even more. So getting to numbers like this is really helpful for our reductions. Next slide. It's important to know that there are regional differences depending on provincial policy and what sort of energy system is already in place in a province. And we're recognizing that the infrastructure access is not the same across the country, and it speaks to some of the work to be done. Next slide. What are the recommendations? I'm going to go, next slide, to each of the 4 areas and acknowledge that that there are higher benefits in certain areas in terms of the greenhouse gas savings, the availability of the solution, and the costs attached to it. This can be looked at more closely. There is twice as much information as this on the presentation on our website. So electric vehicles, high. Next one. The generators, this mentions e-generators, but of course, a lot of work is being done around hydrogen generators as well. Another area of strong impact relative to availability. Next. Studios there is for sure a lot of opportunity here with other sorts of funding that can come into the sector to support studios in their own either transition to being greener or being purpose-built that way. Next slide. And waste and circularity. This one has the perhaps lowest impact from a greenhouse gas perspective, but we also recognize it's a gateway, it's an entry point. Crews are really determined and want to be involved in this process, and sometimes this is the most obvious way to do it. So we're really supportive of this as well. And finally, in closing, this work is an opportunity for the producers and for all of those who work in the sector to really begin to see where to begin with the most impactful elements in decreasing greenhouse gas emissions and increasing our potential as a sector for being highly sustainable and reducing our overall footprint. So thank you very much, and I'll look forward to digging deeper with all of you in this. I'm now going to throw it to our next presenters, which is Amanda Stetsky and Elsa Takunaga. Thank you.
Thank you, Tracy. Can you all see me? Oh, I can see myself. Great. Just wait for Elsa to pop up here. Great. So thanks for joining us, everyone. My name is Amanda Stetsky. I am a white Caucasian woman with brown hair, and I'm in my 30s. And in my background, it's a little dark, but there are some books, and I'm in my home office. And I'm the Senior Advisor of Health, Safety, and Environment within CBC Radio Canada for our real estate portfolio. So that is our offices and production sites across the country.
I'm Elsa, a Japanese Canadian woman in my late 20s. I have black hair pulled back in a ponytail, and I'm wearing glasses with red frames. I'm sitting in my home office / kitchen, but my background is blurred.
Great. And today we're going to talk to you about trash. So can we please have the slide deck up when that's ready? Thank you. So for my segment of the presentation, I will discuss about an AI technology named Oscar, and Elsa will be discussing some tips and tricks to preventing production material going to landfill. Next slide, please. So how can an AI technology called Oscar help us sort our waste? Next slide. So what is Oscar? Oscar is an AI, so artificial intelligence recycling assistant, that prompts individuals to dispose of their waste in the appropriate waste bin. I have an image on the screen of our Oscar in our Montreal building. And as you can see, there's a camera that will see the item, and then Oscar will interact with the user through the screen. So if we go to the next slide. So we have a pilot program that we're running in 2 of our largest sites, one in Toronto, one in Montreal, and both of those Oscars are in slightly different locations. In Toronto, Oscar is near one of the entrances to the building, and in Montreal, Oscar is located in a cafeteria. So the interactions that Oscar will have will be slightly different on those locations. And I have a video here, so there we go. So this video, once we play it, it's our, is it possible to play the video? If not, I'll just describe it. Okay, so I had a video there, and what it is, it demonstrates someone walking towards Oscar, and then once you walk towards Oscar, Oscar will sense that, and then the screen will change to a green, some type of more interactive screen, and then the individual can approach the item to the camera. Oscar will see. In the example in the video I had, Oscar saw that it was a coffee cup. So Oscar prompted the user to put the cardboard sleeve in the paper waste stream, and then the coffee cup in the mixed plastics waste stream. So it's unfortunate the video is not working, but hopefully my description was well enough. So if we can go to the next screen. So why do we need a robot to help us sort our waste? So there's actually quite a few really good benefits to having Oscar joining our team as a waste ambassador, if you will. And the first component is education. So waste and recycling rules differ from municipality and also based on the waste management vendor. So I'll use Toronto as an example. Our waste management vendor in the Toronto building does in fact recycle black plastic. So if you're thinking of a black plastic coffee cup lid, and coffee cups. So our waste management vendor does accept these, which is why we've programmed our Oscar in Toronto to prompt the individual to put it in the plastics waste stream. However, for those of you who live in Toronto, you would know that black plastics is not acceptable in the plastic waste stream, and coffee cups are also not acceptable. So that's one of the items that Oscar really helps us alleviate the confusion that users may have. Oscar is also a very engaging tool and empowers staff to be a part of the solution. And ultimately, Oscar is helping us reduce the contamination of our waste streams and increase our waste diversion rate. One really cool thing about Oscar is it's actually in the back end. So what we see here is the user experience. So the user interacts with Oscar and then puts their item in the stream that they decide to put it in. But Oscar is actually collecting a lot of data as well. So Oscar will see that, we'll see the most commonly thrown out item and if it's being disposed of in the right stream. So for example, in Toronto, this pilot has been running for about 6 months now, and we have a few months of data, and we see that the most commonly thrown out item for the Toronto location, so let's remember that's in an entrance, so people that are going through there probably have just picked up their coffee and a bagel and are heading into the office. So the most commonly thrown out item is napkins, and it's also the most commonly thrown out item that's going in the wrong waste stream. People are throwing out their napkins in the landfill or in the paper cardboard stream, but they should actually be going in compost. So with Oscar, we've been able to tailor a message that reminds people to put their napkins in the composting bin. And with that, I'll hand it over to Elsa.
Hi, thanks, Amanda. So I'm the sustainability manager for This Hour Has 22 Minutes, which is a show filmed in Halifax, located in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and traditional lands of the Mi'kmaq people. So today I'm here to talk about waste diversion on set. I'll share some of the actions that we've taken and mindsets we've nudged to prevent production materials from going to the landfill. As many of the other panelists mentioned, empowerment is critical in achieving real action and lasting impactful change. So with this in mind, our first move as the sustainability team was to meet with each department to let all cast and crew know that we were there to support and encourage their sustainable decision-making and guide their ideas and suggestions. We were there to foster a sense of ownership towards climate change and environmental practices. We also introduced the idea of the circular economy, which is an alternative way to use and consume products. So instead of taking and disposing, we repurpose and reuse, thereby shifting mindsets from owning into renting. If we needed to purchase a product, we tried to first buy secondhand items and refurbish them, giving them a new life. Our props department takes this one step further and has begun noting the local area's curbside giveaway days. These are days where households put no longer wanted items such as furniture out onto the curb. Our props department explores the curbs on these days and picks up and refurbishes potentially useful items. So I'll share a couple more actions that we've helped facilitate and encourage in the past season. So we've been encouraging cast and crew to go electronic instead of using paper. But if printing was necessary, we asked them to print double-sided. So through this technique of communication and education, we were able to reduce 3,000 sheets of paper per week, which allowed us to save approximately 5 fully grown trees throughout the season. We've been renting machines that offer still and carbonated water. This has helped us reduce plastic water bottle consumption by 97% from last season, and our aluminum can consumption by approximately 25%. We've installed busing stations and hired a dishwasher, thereby reducing our single-use container consumption by over 60%. We've also installed large snack dispensers, which helped us get rid of a lot of the single-use plastics like individual chip bags and chocolate. Donated items such as half-used toiletries and foods such as peanut butter and olive oil to shelters, massively reducing the waste left behind from cast and crew who are set up in our long-term accommodations. We purchase as many items as we can from our local zero waste shop. Wardrobe donates clothes that are no longer needed to dress for success, and fabric and art department scraps are used by crew for personal art projects or donated to our local fine arts college. We also donate our wood leftovers there. So although it's important to keep in mind that we want to refurbish and reuse items before recycling them, recycling is of course better than the landfill. So we made sure that the crew was aware of the recycling options that the workplace offers. So our municipality recycles plastic, cardboard, paper, and metals, but we've also introduced TerraCycle, which is a company that works to eliminate the idea of waste. They offer both free and paid national recycling programs for many items, from cigarettes to candy bar wrappers to beauty products. I encourage you to check them out. Finally, we've been taking advantage of free recycling programs offered by Staples and IKEA. They recycle things like e-waste, writing utensils, batteries, light bulbs. We also encourage you to research alternatives to the landfill, to know your local recycling and local donation options. Each and every one of you, whether you're an editor, a caterer, a location scout, a production assistant, or a producer, you have the power and you have the responsibility to take and encourage sustainable actions. Be the next crew member that notices when a prop could be refurbished into something else, or that your local high school could use the item in an art class. Be the person suggesting electronic call sheets instead of paper ones. Be the person who brings a reusable water bottle to set, and be the person who encourages composting. You're the ones who have the influence, the knowledge, the creativity, and the interest in making your sets more sustainable and in preventing items from being sent to the landfill before their lives are up. I really look forward to hearing your stories and ideas for next year. So next up is Marcia Douglas, the Director for the Canada Media Fund. Welcome, Marcia.
Hi there, my name is Marcia Douglas. I'm actually the VP of Growth and Inclusion at the Canada Media Fund. I am a middle-aged mixed-race woman, and I am sitting in a relatively open room in a conference center right now. And thank you for having me. I wanted to take a moment to really acknowledge the work of everybody on this call, and especially CBC for bringing us together. A sort of quick update from CMF because we're aware of the time, and thank you all for joining this call today. So the CMF has introduced a number of new initiatives this year as part of our 2023-24 programs. A couple of things to note. We are now requiring the carbon calculator, and of course, there's Albert that is well supported by CBC and many of the other provincial film commissions, such as Real Green or Ontario Green Screen or Ontario Vert. But we are open to whichever calculator you may wish to use on productions of a certain budget threshold. You can check our guidelines for that information. But more than that, and I think the reason why Lisa invited us here was to talk about our inclusion of eligible costs in both development and production in all phases of all of our types of production, both in convergent and experimental. So recognizing that the shift to more sustainable production practices may involve new types of costs. We want to make any of those costs that are reasonable eligible. So please look to consider including what you may need, both from all the way from development through production. So as an example, maybe in development, you would like to hire a sustainability consultant to develop a sustainability plan for when you go to production. Lastly, in all of our applications, you will see a question that is a drop-down menu of various things that are happening potentially on your production. We're trying to do this to collect more data that we will share later in the year and share with our other partners in the industry as we're all considering how to support this shift and this change. I just wanted to note, because it is a question we've gotten, whether there's a penalty if you select that you're not doing anything. There's not, but it's a good opportunity to consider what you may wish to do on your production, including all the things you've heard today. So I don't want to take more time. I'm going to hand it back to Sally. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Marcia. And I see we're really at time, so I will try to be quick here, but I really do want to give a heartfelt thank you to everyone who shared their wisdom and expertise today. I found it really inspiring and really motivating. A recording of the session will be available on CBC's Business and Rights website under the Green Resources tab, and we'll also send you information and resources on the presentations made today and on how you can sign up for the just announced CBC Good Energy workshops. I also want to thank all the people behind the scenes, Audrey Lardy and Rhonda Redwood, who ran the presentations and tech for today, and Letitia Kegwa and Lisa Clarkson, who were both really driving this entire event. We're hoping the fantastic speakers you heard today will inspire you to consider or further consider the environment in any production decisions you make, knowing that the smallest change can really make the biggest difference. Finally, I'll close by saying we at CBC really want to be your partners in being green. Our hope is that we'll have a session something like Seeds of Change every year so that we can keep track of our progress and celebrate our successes. People in production in Canada are really doing great things, as we've seen today. They're making a difference, and just by showing up today, that would include all of you. So thank you so much.